One of the important applications of population biology, population ecology, is the study and management of the human population. And so here we see a graph of human population that goes back about 10,000 years. And it shows for most of that time relatively small populations, under 100 million people, and then really rapid exponential growth beginning, oh, maybe 1,000 years ago, where we reached the first billion people in 1830, and then the second billion in 1930, and the third billion in 1960, fourth billion in 1974, fifth billion 1987, and right now we're somewhere between 7 and 8 billion. And so human population, the story that's at least recent human population has been exponential growth. And so we've got this exponential growth, and the question is why? Why have human populations grown exponentially? And of course, I should point out not all populations have grown exponentially. Isolated human populations have remained stable. In some places, they've even contracted. They've been a collapse or a crash. But most of the world, there's been this recent exponential growth. And the best explanation is agriculture. That prior to farming, all humans were hunters and gatherers, and uh, there's good evidence of this in the fossil record, evidence of uh, gathering fruits, gathering vegetables, gathering nuts, and hunting. But then about 10,000 years ago, humans transitioned, and three great crops: rice, wheat, and corn. And then improvements in how in the yields of those crops and in the yields of domestic animals, improvements in the ability to transport food surpluses from one place to another, improvements in storing food, and then improvements in taking care of people, reducing death rates, healthcare. And by sanitation, that doesn't just mean cleaning tabletops and sanitizing toilets. It means disposing of human waste, disease causing waste. And so these things have increased the rate of survival and reduced the death rate. Okay. And so human populations have spread not evenly across the world. There's a great majority of the human population is in Southeast Asia, India, China, Burma, Thailand, Vietnam. But then there's also this great swath through Europe and Western Asia of people. But Africa is crowded. The coastal areas of South America and North America are crowded. So we have this great population density and this high population growth. And so the question is, can this go on forever? Um, Whoops, wrong way. Where are we headed? And so there are several projections, and there is some evidence that U.S. not U.S. world population will start to level off, maybe even start to decline. It depends on how many children the average woman has, and it depends on mortality rates and things like that. And so there's concern that the world is overpopulated, and so what are we going to do about it? When we look at fertility rates, we can see that fertility rates in many parts of the world are falling. In large parts of the world where population densities are very high, fertility rates are just barely at replacement or above replacement. Um, it's only in some parts of the world where fertility rates are still high, parts of Africa, a few parts of Asia. And so this has kind of led to um, changes in population age structures. There's only a handful of countries that have this rapidly expanding population age structure like we see here for Guatemala, Nigeria, and Saudi Arabia. In the most case, we have stable populations or slowly expanding populations, but in large parts of the world, there's actually declining populations, and this has to do with declining fertility. And really, the important thing to understand here is that although population has risen, it's more been that the conditions have changed, that humans are we're like elephants. We're animals with equilibrium life histories. We take a long time to mature. We produce one offspring at a time, and we spend a lot of time investing in our children. And then there's this gap between reproductions. And so generally, um, people can adjust their fertility and behavior to the conditions around them, and so they do that. And so they adjust their behavior to reduce their fertility. Really, what's gone on in the world in the last 200 years is, as there's been improvements to agriculture and to medicine and sanitation, we've transitioned from undeveloped countries, which have high fertility and high mortality rates, to countries that have, as agriculture has improved, to countries that have lower and lower mortality rates, and gradually fertility has decreased as well. And this is because of this kind of the social situation that prior to 200 years ago, if you were an adult, your only retirement plan was to have children. If you knew that you were going to become older and less able to support yourself, the key thing would be to have enough children so one of those children could support you, or that working together they could possibly support you. And so the retirement plan for all people was to live with their children. Um, but as countries changed, and as you had these adoptions of uh, governments that were able to install things like Social Security, um, socialized healthcare like insurance or government guaranteed healthcare, that it no longer became as important to have a large family because you could count on saving enough money and having some income when you were older. And so you could transition to not having as many children. So gradually, people develop smaller families. And this change in society is called the demographic transition. And so it shows it here with birth rates and death rates, that death rates fell first and then birth rates fall. And while this happens, you first go through this period of rapid increases in population where there's large numbers of young people because more are surviving. But gradually, the birth rates will match that lower death rate. And again, you'll get to a stable population. Okay. So, in summary, human populations have increased rapidly over the past 200 years. Humans have equilibrium life history traits and can adjust their fertility rates. Underdeveloped countries have high rates of fertility and mortality. Developed countries have low rates of fertility and mortality. And so these, until the country makes that transition, you get rapid population growth. This has a big uh, importance in understanding the effect of populations on the environment. The impact of humans, our ecological footprint, depends not just on population size, but also on resource use. Okay, what what kind of resources we use, how much energy we use, how much how much materials we need for our consumption, what kind of crops we consume, what kind of products we want to live with. Okay, we'll talk more about this in our next program.